My name is Ellen Carter, and I am 54 years old. I am a person who has organized her entire life around systems, procedures, and the quiet certainty that if you follow the rules will protect you. I have built my career on this belief. I work as the supervisor of accounting compliance at Riverside Components, a manufacturing company that has grown from a small regional operation to a nationally recognized business. I have spent 28 years at this company, and in that time, I have prevented fraud, caught accounting discrepancies, and maintained the kind of rigorous standards that keep organizations from falling apart. I have applied these same standards to my marriage. I have kept track of expenses. I have organized finances. I have planned for the future. I have done everything that a person is supposed to do to build a stable, secure, lasting partnership. I have done this for 32 years. And then, on the evening of June 15th, in a private dining room at the Heritage Restaurant in Omaha, Nebraska, my husband of 32 years stood up, raised a glass of champagne, and told everyone in the room that he was leaving me. The gathering was a celebration. We had invited close friends and family to mark our daughter Chloe's college graduation. Chloe had just completed her degree in environmental science from the University of Nebraska. We were there to celebrate her achievement, to recognize the fact that she had worked hard and persevered and accomplished something significant. We were there for her. My husband Gregory stood up and tapped his glass with his fork. The sound of the tapping glass resonated through the room, drawing everyone's attention. I remember thinking, in that moment before he spoke, that he was about to say something lovely about our daughter. I remember thinking that he was going to express pride in Chloe's accomplishment. I remember thinking that he was about to participate in a normal, expected moment of family celebration. Instead, he said, "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight to celebrate Chloe's incredible achievement. She is an amazing young woman, and I could not be more proud of her." He paused, and I felt a sense of relief. This was good. This was what I expected. This was appropriate. And then he continued, "I also want to use this moment to make an announcement about my own life. I have made a decision that I need to share with all of you. I am ending my marriage to Ellen. I am leaving this marriage because I have come to understand that I need something different from what Ellen is able to provide. Ellen is a good wife in many ways. She is organized. She is responsible. She understands numbers and procedures and how to maintain a stable household. But she does not understand how to live. She does not understand risk. She does not understand adventure. She does not understand how to be truly alive. I have met someone who does understand these things. Her name is Sloane Parker, and I am going to be starting a new life with her." The room fell silent, completely silent. The kind of silence that happens when people have just heard something that they cannot believe they heard, that they cannot process, that they cannot immediately respond to. Chloe, who was sitting across from me, put her fork down slowly. Chloe's face went very pale. I could see her hands starting to shake slightly. I did not say anything. I did not make a scene. I did not respond with anger or hurt or any of the emotions that would have been entirely justified in that moment. Instead, I remained very still. I remained very calm. And I slowly reached up to my left hand, where my wedding ring had been sitting for 32 years, and I took it off. I looked at the ring for a moment. I looked at the gold band, at the small diamond in the center, at the engagement ring that Gregory had given me when he asked me to marry him. I looked at the symbol of the marriage that he had just announced he was ending in front of approximately 150 people. And then I dropped the ring into the glass of water that was sitting in front of my place at the table. I did this not as a dramatic gesture. I did this not because I wanted to make a scene. I did this because I needed to do something with my hands, and I needed to do something that would allow me to process what had just happened without speaking. The ring fell into the water. It sank to the bottom of the glass, and I watched it settle there, the gold gleaming under the water, disconnected from my finger, but still in my possession. I looked up from the glass. I looked at my husband. I looked at my daughter. I looked at the assembled friends and family members who were watching us with expressions of varying degrees of shock and dismay. And then I stood up. I stood up from the table, and I walked to the ladies' room, and I locked myself into a stall, and I took out my phone. I called Monica Fields. Monica is a family law attorney who I have known for 15 years, not as a client, but as someone I met through professional women's networks. Monica is someone I have always respected for her intelligence, her competence, and her absolute refusal to tolerate nonsense. I called Monica Fields at 10 o'clock at night on June 15th, and Monica answered the phone, and I said, very quietly, "My husband just announced he's leaving me in front of 150 people. I need a lawyer." Monica, to her credit, did not say, "Oh my God, Eni," or "I'm so sorry," or any of the things that most people say in this situation. Monica said, "Okay, I need you to tell me everything. When exactly did he make this announcement? Were there witnesses? Did he mention money? Did he mention any other woman? I need every detail." This is why I called Monica. This is why I knew instinctively that what I needed in that moment was not comfort or sympathy, but professional clarity. What I needed was someone who understood how to fight. What I needed was someone who understood that the battle had just begun. I returned to the dinner table after approximately 15 minutes. I sat back down at my place. I noticed that my water glass was still there, and the wedding ring was still at the bottom of it. I looked at the ring, and I thought about what it had meant, and what it was about to mean. I looked at the ring, and I made a decision. I took a small cream-colored envelope out of my purse. This envelope contained a copy of our prenuptial agreement, signed in 2001, before Gregory and I were married. I also had with me a section of the prenuptial agreement that had been amended and re-signed in 2016, when we had made certain updates to the original document. The most relevant section was Section 7.3, which dealt with the issue of marital infidelity and what the financial consequences of that infidelity would be. I placed this envelope on the table in front of Gregory. I did not say anything. I simply placed the envelope there, and I looked at him, and I waited. Gregory's face changed. Gregory's expression went from confident and self-satisfied to confused, and then to concerned. Gregory opened the envelope slowly. He looked at the papers inside, and I could see the moment when he understood that I was not going to accept this situation without a fight. I also placed a second document on the table. This document was a ledger. This ledger was a record that I had been keeping unconsciously for the entire duration of our marriage. This ledger contained every significant financial decision that I had made in service of our marriage and our family. This ledger contained the following entries: Chloe's college education, including tuition, room and board, and books, $68,400. The first instance when Gregory's investment portfolio experienced significant losses, and I used personal savings to cover those losses, $23,000. The second instance when Gregory's investment portfolio experienced significant losses, and I used personal savings to cover those losses, $71,000. The opportunity for promotion at my job that I did not pursue because Gregory was offered a significant job opportunity in another city, and we decided that his opportunity was more important than mine. This resulted in foregone income of approximately $135,000 over a 5-year period. Therapy for Chloe when she was struggling emotionally after her father's business partner situation caused serious financial instability, $9,500. Total financial sacrifice, $297,400. Time frame, 18 years. I placed this ledger on the table in front of Gregory, and I looked at him, and I said nothing. The ledger spoke for itself. Chloe, who was still sitting across from us, who had been processing the fact that her father was announcing his affair and departure on the evening of her graduation celebration, looked at this exchange between her parents, and I could see something shift in her. I could see her understanding that her mother was not going to accept this situation without a response. I could see her understanding that her mother had prepared. I could see her understanding that there was more to this story than what her father had just announced. After dinner ended, after we had gathered our things and left the restaurant, I took Chloe to my car. I did not speak to Gregory. I did not acknowledge his attempts to talk to me. I simply left. In the car, on the drive home, Chloe said to me, "Mom, what just happened? What was that ledger? What was in that envelope?" I said very quietly, "Your father made a choice tonight. He made a choice to announce his affair and his infidelity in front of 150 people who care about you. He made a choice to use your graduation celebration as the venue for his personal announcement, and he made a choice to do this without any understanding of the consequences that would follow. What just happened at the dinner table was me beginning to ensure that there would be consequences." Chloe looked at me, and I could see tears forming in her eyes. Chloe said, "Are you going to be okay, Mom? I'm scared." I took Chloe's hand and I held it for a moment, and then I said, "I'm going to be fine, and you're going to be fine, because we're going to do this the right way. We're going to follow procedure. We're going to document everything. We're going to protect ourselves legally, and we're going to make sure that your father understands that there are consequences for the choices he makes. Don't be afraid of the law, Chloe. The law is cold, I know, but it's warmer than silence." For 2 months before the graduation dinner, before my husband's announcement, I had been noticing something. I had been noticing financial transactions that I could not immediately categorize. I had been noticing that money was leaving our joint account in amounts that ranged from $3,200 to $4,800, multiple times each month. The transactions were going to an entity called Parker Properties, LLC. As an accountant, as someone whose career is built on the foundation of understanding financial systems and detecting anomalies, I knew that this pattern was unusual. I knew that this pattern was the kind of pattern that, when you find it in a corporate account, indicates that something is being hidden. I knew that this pattern was significant, and I knew that I needed to understand what it meant. I began keeping a separate record. I began tracking each transaction. I began photographing the bank statements. I began creating a file of documentation. I did this not because I was suspicious of my husband, though I had begun to develop suspicions. I did this because I am a person who believes in evidence. I believe in documentation. I believe in systems that organize information so that truth becomes visible. The reason I know about Parker Properties, LLC, is that I recognized the name. I recognized it because I had heard it in passing, mentioned casually by Gregory in conversation with colleagues. I had heard him mention it as a property management company. I had heard him mention it in the context of real estate. I had assumed it was a client. I had assumed it was a business contact. I had not assumed, not at first, that it was the vehicle through which my husband was conducting an affair. But then something happened that changed my understanding. I received a piece of junk mail addressed to Gregory at our home. The mail was from an investment company, and it was advertising retirement planning services. On the back of the piece of junk mail was a handwritten note that had apparently been inserted by someone before the mail was sent. The note said, "Call me. Cedar Shore is perfect." The signature was Sloan. I held this piece of junk mail in my hand, and I understood, with absolute certainty, that my marriage was over. I understood that my husband had been having an affair. I understood that Parker Properties, LLC was not a business client, but a vehicle for facilitating that affair. I understood that the money that was being transferred to Parker Properties was money that was being transferred to support another woman. I did not confront my husband immediately. I did not say anything. Instead, I began the process of understanding the full extent of what had happened. I began the process of gathering evidence. I began the process of building a record. I reached out to Paula Jensen. Paula is a colleague of mine at Riverside Components. Paula is someone who I have worked with for 12 years and someone who I trust. I invited Paula to lunch, and over lunch, I told her what I had discovered. I told her about the transactions to Parker Properties. I told her about the handwritten note. I told her about my suspicions regarding my husband's affair. Paula listened to me without interrupting. Paula listened to me with the kind of attention that suggests she understands the significance of what I am saying. And then Paula said, "Ellen, I want to say something to you, and I want you to listen carefully. Sometimes, maintaining the rules, maintaining the law, maintaining the procedures that organize society is the way that we say to the world, I still believe in justice. I still believe in fairness. I still believe that people should be held accountable for their actions. What you're describing is a betrayal. But what you're about to do, if you do it carefully, if you do it legally, if you do it with documentation and evidence, what you're about to do is reclaim your power. What you're about to do is say to your husband, I knew. I documented. I will not be silenced." I thought about what Paula had said. I thought about the distinction between revenge and justice. I thought about the distinction between reacting emotionally and responding strategically. And I made a decision. I opened a new email account. I created an encrypted folder. I began downloading bank statements. I began photographing documents. I began recording conversations with my husband. I began creating what would become the evidence that would eventually change everything. I drove to Prairie State Bank, where Gregory and I maintained our joint account. I asked to speak with Victor Tran, the bank manager. I explained to Victor that I needed to understand the complete transaction history for our joint account over the past 2 years. I explained that I was conducting personal financial research. I did not explain why. I simply presented myself as someone who had the right to access this information, which I did, because I was a joint account holder. Victor provided me with complete transaction histories. Victor provided me with bank statements. Victor provided me with details about every transfer that had been made. And I reviewed all of this information, and I confirmed what I had already suspected. I confirmed that my husband had been transferring significant amounts of money to Parker Properties, LLC, over an extended period of time. I confirmed that this pattern indicated something systematic, something planned, something that was not accidental. I also began investigating Parker Properties, LLC. I discovered that Parker Properties was registered to a woman named Sloane Parker. I discovered that Sloane Parker was a real estate agent. I discovered that Sloane Parker had a professional history that suggested she was someone who understood money, property, and how to navigate financial systems. I discovered something else. I discovered that Gregory had, apparently, purchased a condominium as part of a real estate development called Cedar Shore. Cedar Shore was a luxury retirement community in Nevada. The condominium had been purchased by Gregory under his name, but under documentation that indicated that Sloane Parker had equal ownership. The condominium had been purchased without my knowledge, without my input, and without my consent. The condominium had been purchased using joint marital funds. This was the moment when I understood that what my husband had done was not just an affair. What my husband had done was a betrayal that had financial, legal, and emotional consequences. What my husband had done was criminal in the sense that it violated our prenuptial agreement. What my husband had done was create a situation that required not emotional response, but legal response. I created a USB drive, a silver USB drive, sleek and small, and I organized all of the evidence onto this drive. I created a folder called Cedar Shore, and I placed into that folder screenshots of the transaction history, documentation of the Cedar Shore purchase, photographs of the condominium, and something else. Something else that would become crucial. I had recorded a conversation with Gregory. I had done this using a voice recording app on my phone, and I had done it legally. We live in a state that allows recording with the consent of one party, which, in this case, was me, which meant that I had the legal right to record my husband without his knowledge. In this recording, Gregory was bragging about the Cedar Shore property. In this recording, Gregory was explaining to someone on the other end of the phone, Sloan, that he had surprised her with the purchase. In this recording, Gregory was saying, "I told you on graduation night that I was done with the old life. I'm done with Ellen. I'm done with the pretense. I'm ready to start over." I placed this recording into the USB drive. I labeled it. I organized it. And I waited for the moment when I would use this evidence. I made an appointment with Monica Fields. I came to her office carrying the silver USB drive, carrying the printed copies of documents, carrying the ledger I had created. I came carrying the physical evidence of my husband's betrayal, but more importantly, I came carrying the documentation of his violation of our prenuptial agreement. Monica listened as I laid out everything. Monica listened as I explained the transactions, the Cedar Shore purchase, the affair with Sloan Parker, the public announcement at our daughter's graduation dinner. Monica listened, and she took notes, and she asked careful, precise questions about dates and amounts and documentation. When I finished explaining, Monica opened a file on her computer. She pulled up the prenuptial agreement that Gregory and I had signed in 2001. Monica highlighted Section 7.3. Section 7.3 dealt with the issue of marital infidelity. Section 7.3 stated that in the event of infidelity by either spouse, the unfaithful spouse would forfeit certain financial rights and protections under the marriage. Section 7.3 stated that infidelity would result in the unfaithful spouse being unable to claim joint marital assets as part of divorce proceedings. Then, Monica pulled up another document. This was the amendment to the prenuptial agreement that had been signed in 2016. In this amendment, Section 7.3 had been reaffirmed. In this amendment, the definition of infidelity had been expanded to include not just physical infidelity, but also the concealment of assets for the purpose of funding a relationship with another person. In this amendment, the consequences of infidelity had been made more severe, not less severe. The amendment had been signed by both Gregory and myself. "This," Monica said, pointing to the amendment, "this is everything we need. Your husband violated Section 7.3 of a legally binding prenuptial agreement. He concealed assets. He purchased property with joint marital funds for the purpose of supporting a relationship with another woman. He documented his own infidelity by bragging about it to that woman. We have evidence, we have documentation, and we have a legal basis to respond." Monica explained the process. Monica explained that she would file an emergency motion to freeze marital assets. Monica explained that this motion would request that the court immediately suspend access to joint marital accounts and prevent the transfer of marital property. Monica explained that the basis for this motion would be the violation of Section 7.3 of the prenuptial agreement, combined with evidence of asset concealment and evidence that Gregory was attempting to move assets outside the marital estate. "There's something else," Monica said. "Under the terms of your prenuptial agreement, in the event of infidelity by your husband, you retain the primary residence, you retain the house. You also retain 55% of the marital assets. Your husband forfeits the protections that would normally apply in a divorce proceeding." I listened to this, and I felt something shift inside me. I felt the understanding that I had done something right. I felt the understanding that, 32 years ago, when Gregory and I were young and in love and we were signing a prenuptial agreement before we got married, I had actually been protecting myself. even though I didn't realize I needed protection. I had advocated for terms that would address the possibility of infidelity, and those terms were now going to protect me in the situation that had actually come to pass. Monica filed the emergency motion to freeze marital assets on July 3rd. Monica included in this motion copies of the prenuptial agreement and the 2016 amendment. Monica included the transaction records from Prairie State Bank. Monica included documentation of the Cedar Shore purchase. Monica included the recording of Gregory bragging about his affair and his plans to leave the marriage. The response from Gregory's attorney was swift and aggressive. Gregory's attorney argued that the prenuptial agreement was outdated. Gregory's attorney argued that the 2016 amendment had been signed under duress. Gregory's attorney argued that the Cedar Shore property was a legitimate investment and not a gift to Sloan Parker. Gregory's attorney argued that nothing in the prenuptial agreement could be used to penalize Gregory for making an independent financial decision about how to use his money. But Monica had anticipated all of these arguments. Monica had prepared responses to each and every claim. Monica had documentation showing that the 2016 amendment had been signed of Gregory's own volition, not under duress. Monica had documentation showing that the Cedar Shore property had been purchased using joint marital funds and that the title included Sloan Parker as an equal owner. Monica had the recording of Gregory admitting to the affair. The court hearing was scheduled for August 15th. The hearing would take place before Judge Elaine Morton in the Hawthorne County Family Court. I prepared myself for this hearing the way I prepare for everything, with organization, with documentation, with the understanding that evidence and procedure are the weapons of people who want to be heard without yelling. The morning of August 15th, I woke up and looked out my bedroom window. It was raining. It was the kind of Midwestern rain that is not gentle, not light, but relentless and heavy. The rain was pouring down on Omaha, and it was supposed to continue throughout the day. I watched the rain, and I thought about how weather seems to organize itself around emotional moments. I thought about how the sky was appropriately dramatic for what was about to happen. I dressed carefully. I wore a dark suit. I wore minimal jewelry. I wore my hair in a style that I have worn for work meetings for 28 years, a style that is professional, that is calm, that does not draw attention to itself. I was going to court, and I was going to present my case, and I was going to do it in a manner that would be clear and undeniable. Monica picked me up at 9 in the morning. We drove to the Hawthorne County Courthouse through heavy rain. The courthouse is an older building made of brick and stone, with wide stone steps leading up to the main entrance. By the time we arrived, the stone steps were wet and slick, and the rain was coming down so heavily that it was difficult to see clearly. We entered the courthouse. We went through the metal detectors. We made our way to Judge Elaine Morton's courtroom. The courtroom was not large. It was a room designed to accommodate family law cases, more intimate than a criminal courtroom, but still formal, still official, still unmistakably a place where the law was dispensed. Gregory was already there when we arrived. Gregory was sitting at the table designated for the plaintiff's counsel. Gregory was sitting next to his attorney, a man named Richard Hawkins who specialized in divorce law. Gregory was wearing an expensive suit. Gregory looked confident. Gregory looked like a man who had done something wrong, but who believed that his money and his status would protect him from consequence. Sloan Parker was sitting in the gallery. Sloan was looking at her phone. Sloan did not make eye contact with me when I entered the room. Sloan had the appearance of someone who was not taking this situation seriously, who believed that whatever happened in this courtroom would not actually affect her. I sat down at the table next to Monica. I arranged my papers. I placed the copies of the prenuptial agreement in front of me. I placed the transaction records in front of me. I placed the USB drive with the recordings in front of me. I prepared myself for the moment when the judge would arrive. Judge Elaine Morton entered the courtroom at 10 o'clock exactly. Judge Morton was a woman in her early 60s. Judge Morton had been on the bench for 15 years. Judge Morton had the particular demeanor of someone who had seen many divorces, who had heard many claims, who had learned to distinguish between truth and fiction by listening carefully to the evidence and the arguments presented. Monica stood, and Monica began her presentation. Monica explained that the plaintiff was seeking an emergency motion to freeze marital assets based on the violation of a prenuptial agreement's infidelity clause. Monica explained that the defendant, my husband Gregory, had secretly purchased property with joint marital funds and had used that property to support an affair with a third party. Monica explained that the defendant had documented his own infidelity on multiple occasions. Monica explained that the defendant was attempting to move assets outside the marital estate to prevent those assets from being considered in divorce proceedings. Monica presented the prenuptial agreement. Monica highlighted Section 7.3. Monica explained the amendment signed in 2016. Judge Morton reviewed these documents carefully. Judge Morton made notes. Judge Morton did not interrupt Monica. Then Monica presented the bank records. Monica showed, in clear chronological order, the transfers from our joint marital account to Parker Properties, LLC. Monica showed the transaction history. Monica showed amounts, dates, and patterns. The patterns were unmistakable. The patterns showed systematic, deliberate transfers of marital funds for the purpose of supporting another woman. Then Monica presented the documentation of the Cedar Shore property purchase. Monica showed the deed. Monica showed that Gregory had purchased the property using joint marital funds. Monica showed that Sloan Parker was listed as an equal owner. Monica explained that the property had been purchased without the knowledge or consent of the other spouse. Finally, Monica played the recording. The recording that I had made of Gregory explaining to Sloan Parker that he had announced his departure from the marriage at our daughter's graduation dinner. The recording where Gregory was bragging about the Cedar Shore property. The recording where Gregory was describing his plans to leave the marriage and start a new life with Sloan. The courtroom was silent while the recording played. I watched Gregory's face as he listened to himself on the recording. I watched his expression change from confident to concerned, to something that looked almost desperate. When the recording finished, Judge Morton looked at Gregory's attorney and said, "Does the defendant wish to respond to these allegations?" Richard Hawkins stood. Richard Hawkins argued that the prenuptial agreement was outdated. Richard Hawkins argued that the 2016 amendment was no longer enforceable because the marriage had deteriorated to the point where the agreement was no longer relevant. Richard Hawkins argued that the Cedar Shore property was a legitimate investment and that Sloan Parker's involvement in the purchase was coincidental. Judge Morton interrupted. Judge Morton said, "Counsel, are you arguing that your client did not violate Section 7.3 of the prenuptial agreement as amended in 2016? Richard Hawkins hesitated. Richard Hawkins said, "Your Honor, the definition of infidelity is subjective. The document is ambiguous." Judge Morton looked at the document. Judge Morton read Section 7.3 aloud. The section was not ambiguous. The section was clear. The section stated that if either spouse engaged in a romantic or sexual relationship with another person, and if that spouse concealed marital assets to support such a relationship, then that spouse would forfeit certain financial protections in the event of divorce. Judge Morton looked at Gregory and asked him directly, "Defendant, did you engage in a romantic relationship with Sloan Parker?" Gregory looked at his attorney. His attorney nodded at him. Gregory looked at the judge and said, "Your Honor, yes, but," Judge Morton interrupted. "Did you purchase the Cedar Shore property using joint marital funds?" Gregory said, "Yes, but the investment—" Judge Morton interrupted again. "Did you place Ms. Parker's name on the title as an equal owner?" Gregory said, "Yes, but—" Judge Morton said, Then you have violated Section 7.3 of your prenuptial agreement as amended in 2016. The court finds that you have engaged in conduct that violates the terms of your prenuptial agreement. The court finds that you have concealed marital assets to support a relationship with another person. The court finds that the evidence is clear, the documentation is complete, and the violation is evident. Judge Morton then issued her ruling. Judge Morton ordered that all joint marital accounts be frozen immediately. Judge Morton ordered that the Cedar Shore property be transferred to my exclusive control, pending further proceedings. Judge Morton ordered that Gregory be prohibited from transferring, selling, or encumbering any marital property without the court's permission. Judge Morton ordered that I retain the primary residence and 55% of the marital assets. The hammer came down. Judge Morton's gavel struck the bench, and the rain outside struck the courthouse windows, and the sound of the judge's ruling echoed through the courtroom. I could see Gregory's face crumble. I could see the moment when he realized that the consequences he had assumed would not apply to him were actually going to apply to him. I could see the moment when he understood that his status, his money, his confidence would not protect him from the fact that he had violated a legally binding agreement. I turned and looked at Chloe, who had been sitting in the gallery behind me. I turned and saw my daughter watching her father face the consequences of his actions. I turned and saw something shift in Chloe's face. I saw the moment when she understood that her mother had not been destroyed by the public humiliation at the graduation dinner. I saw the moment when she understood that her mother had been preparing a response. Chloe stood up as the hearing ended. Chloe approached me and put her arms around me. Chloe said, "Mom, what you did, what you said, it was amazing. You didn't yell, you didn't cry, you just let the law do the talking for you." I held my daughter, and I felt the weight of what had just happened lifting slightly. I felt the understanding that I had done what I needed to do. I felt the understanding that I had protected myself and my family through procedure and evidence and the clear application of law. Gregory approached me as we were leaving the courtroom. Gregory said, "Ellen, what you did was unfair. You set me up. You recorded me without permission." I said, "I recorded you perfectly legally. I documented everything that you did. I presented the evidence, and the judge made her decision based on the facts. What's unfair is that you thought you could betray your family, violate your prenuptial agreement, and face no consequences." I did not wait for Gregory to respond. I simply left. I left the courtroom with my daughter beside me. I left the courthouse and walked down the stone steps in the rain. I left and did not look back. I returned to my house after the court hearing. My house, which I had retained, which was now legally mine, which was the one thing that Gregory could not take away from me because the prenuptial agreement had been very specific about that provision. I walked into my house and I felt something that I had not felt in months. I felt something that might have been peace. I felt something that might have been the beginning of the ability to move forward. I went to the front entrance. I went to the smart lock on my front door. I placed my hand on the lock, and I listened to it click. I listened to the sound of the lock engaging, of the door securing, of the boundary between my private space and the outside world being established and confirmed. I went to the living room. In the living room, on the mantelpiece, there is a clock. A grandfather clock that Gregory and I purchased when we were newly married, when we were young and in love and we believed that the future would be stable and secure. Gregory and I had purchased this clock, and Gregory had said something that I had remembered for 32 years. Gregory had said, "Let's keep time together. Let this clock remind us to keep rhythm with each other." I looked at the clock. The clock had stopped some months ago. I had not wound it. I had not bothered to maintain it because it seemed like too much effort for something that had lost its meaning. But now, looking at it, I decided to wind the clock. I decided to set it to the correct time. I decided to make it start working again, not for the marriage, but for myself. I decided that I was going to keep time for my own life now. I wound the clock, and I heard the familiar mechanical sounds as the spring engaged and the pendulum began to swing. I set the time to the current time. I watched as the second hand began to move. I watched as the clock came back to life, and I felt something that I am almost ashamed to admit that I did not expect to feel. I felt relief. I felt the particular kind of relief that comes from taking care of something, from maintaining something, from being able to fix something that had been broken. There was a knock on my door. I was not expecting anyone. I was not expecting Gregory to come to the house because he had been ordered by the court not to enter the property without permission. But I heard the knock, and I knew, without having to open the door, that it was Gregory. I opened the door slightly. Not all the way, but enough to see Gregory standing outside in the rain. Gregory was soaking wet. Gregory had apparently been waiting outside for some time without seeking shelter. Gregory looked at me and said, "Ellen, can we talk?" I could have refused. I could have closed the door. I could have exercised the protection that the court had just given me by ordering Gregory to stay away, but I opened the door a bit wider and I said, "You have 5 minutes." Gregory said, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what I did at Chloe's graduation. I'm sorry for the affair. I'm sorry for the Cedar Shore property. I'm sorry for treating you like you were nothing more than a person who manages numbers and systems." I listened to this apology, and I evaluated it. I listened to the words, and I considered whether they were sincere or whether they were simply words that Gregory had been told to say by his attorney as a way of mitigating the consequences he was facing. "Apology is not the same as forgiveness," I said, "and forgiveness is not something that I owe you. What I will say is this: I do not hate you. I hate what you did. I hate the choices you made. I hate the betrayal and the violation and the contempt that you showed for our marriage and for our family. But hating what you did is not the same as hating you. And I am willing to proceed from this moment forward with civility if you are willing to do the same." Gregory said, "I don't understand how you could document everything like that. I don't understand how you could be so cold, so calculated, so prepared to destroy me." I said, "I didn't destroy you. You destroyed yourself. I simply observed, documented, and presented the evidence to the court. I simply reminded the court of the agreement that you signed. I simply held you accountable to the consequences of your own actions. That is not cruelty. That is justice." I closed the door. I closed the door and I locked it, and I listened to the click of the lock engaging. And I did not feel angry or sad or regretful. I simply felt the sense that a boundary had been established and maintained. The next morning, I received a message from Paula. Paula sent me a text message that simply said, "Freedom feels different than you thought, doesn't it?"
I thought about this message. I thought about what freedom actually feels like. I thought about the fact that freedom, true freedom, is not the absence of constraint. True freedom is the presence of choice. True freedom is the ability to make decisions about your own life without having to manage someone else's emotions or someone else's needs. True freedom is the ability to set boundaries and have those boundaries respected. Chloe and I sat down for breakfast the morning after the court hearing. We sat in the kitchen of the house that was now legally mine, and we did not talk about what had happened in court. We did not talk about Gregory. We simply ate breakfast together, and we felt the silence, and the silence felt clean. After breakfast, Chloe said, "Mom, can I ask you something? At the restaurant, when Dad announced he was leaving, why didn't you yell at him? Why didn't you make a scene?" I said, because yelling wouldn't have changed anything. Yelling would have just been noise. What I needed to do was be strategic. What I needed to do was gather evidence. What I needed to do was let the law speak for me. Does that make sense? Chloe said, Yes, it makes sense. And Mom, I want to tell you something. I realized something when I was watching Dad's face when the judge made her ruling. I realized that the worst thing that can happen to someone like Dad, someone who operates on charm and confidence and assumption of superiority, is not to be yelled at or confronted emotionally. The worst thing that can happen is to be confronted with documentation of their own actions. The worst thing that can happen is to be confronted with evidence that they cannot deny or dismiss or reframe. I looked at my daughter, and I felt something that was almost overwhelming. I felt pride in the fact that she understood this. I felt pride in the fact that she had learned something important about how to protect herself in a world that can be difficult and unjust. I felt pride in the fact that she had learned that there is a difference between violence and strength, and that strength often looks like procedure, like documentation, like the quiet assertion of boundaries. I returned to work at Riverside Components the week after the court hearing. I returned to my desk, my computer, my role as the supervisor of accounting compliance. I returned to the work that I had been doing for 28 years. And the work felt different now. The work felt like something that I was choosing to do, not something that I was obligated to do. I received a promotion shortly after returning to work. I was promoted to the position of Director of Financial Operations for the entire company. I was given a significant raise. I was given responsibilities that I had been preparing for throughout my career. And I accepted this promotion not as a way of replacing what I had lost in my marriage, but as a way of building something that belonged entirely to me. I took out the silver USB drive that contained all of the evidence of Gregory's infidelity and asset concealment. I took out the USB drive and I thought about what it represented. It represented the moment when I had decided to protect myself. It represented the moment when I had understood that documentation and procedure could be more powerful than emotion and confrontation. It represented the moment when I had decided to fight on my own terms, using my own strengths, using the skills and abilities that made me who I am. I deleted the contents of the USB drive. I did not need to keep the evidence anymore. The evidence had been presented. The court had ruled. The outcome had been determined. What I had stored on the USB drive had served its purpose, and now, having served its purpose, it could be released. I took the wedding ring out of the glass where I had left it when I removed it at the restaurant. I took the ring and I held it and I looked at it for a long time. I looked at the gold band. I looked at the small diamond. I looked at the symbol of a marriage that had lasted 32 years and had ended in a restaurant in front of 150 people. I did not throw the ring away. I did not destroy it. I did not perform any kind of symbolic destruction of the marriage. Instead, I took the ring and I placed it in a box. I placed the box in a drawer. I kept the ring because it was part of my history, part of my story, part of the evidence of who I had been and what I had survived. I kept the ring not as a way of holding on to the marriage, but as a way of remembering what the marriage had been before it ended. The day after I returned the ring to its box, the rain stopped. The Midwestern rain that had been falling for what seemed like weeks finally ended. The sun came out, the sky cleared, the weather changed. Chloe and I stood on the back porch of the house and looked out at the city of Omaha beyond our yard. We looked at the sky, which was now clear and blue. We looked at the grass, which was wet and green. We looked at the world, which had been washed clean by the rain. Chloe said, "It's pretty after the rain." I said, "Rain doesn't hurt things. It just cleans them. It washes away the dust and the debris and the things that are no longer useful. After the rain, everything is clearer." We stood together on the porch, and we felt the peace of a moment that was clean and clear and entirely our own. We felt the peace of having survived something difficult and having emerged on the other side with our dignity intact. We felt the peace of having done what was right, not what was easy. I went back inside. I looked at the grandfather clock in the living room. The clock was ticking, marking time, keeping rhythm for my life now. The clock was ticking at the correct time, keeping proper time, maintaining the rhythm that I was setting for my own future. And I felt the particular kind of peace that comes from having done what was necessary, from having protected what was important, from having stood up for myself without destroying myself in the process. I felt the peace of having used the law not as a weapon, but as a tool for establishing justice. My husband chose to leave an applause at a restaurant in front of 150 people. He chose to announce his betrayal as if it was a victory. He chose to walk away believing that his confidence and his charm would protect him from consequence. I chose to stay. I chose to stay in the house. I chose to stay with my daughter. I chose to stay in my career. I chose to stay with the law as my language, with procedure as my weapon, with documentation as my shield. And staying with the law, it turned out, was the way to win without destroying myself. 1 year after the court hearing, the divorce was finalized. 1 year after the court hearing, I received the settlement that Judge Elaine Morton had determined I was entitled to under the terms of the prenuptial agreement and the violation of Section 7.3 that Gregory had committed. 55% of the marital assets came to me. The primary residence remained in my name. Certain other properties that had been purchased during the marriage became my property. The Cedar Shore property that Gregory had purchased for Sloane Parker was sold, and the proceeds were divided according to the court order. I received a substantial portion of those proceeds, but more than the money, I received something else. I received the understanding that I had done what I needed to do. I received the confirmation from the legal system that my prenuptial agreement was valid and enforceable. I received the confirmation that I had not been wrong to anticipate the possibility of infidelity and to build protections for myself into the legal structure of my marriage. Gregory married Sloane Parker 6 months after the divorce was finalized. Gregory and Sloane purchased a smaller property in Nevada near the Cedar Shore development. Gregory and Sloane have built a life together that, from what I can gather from social media, appears to be happy and stable. I have not spoken to Gregory since the court hearing. I have not attempted to maintain any relationship with him. The prenuptial agreement and the court order have made it clear that Gregory and I are no longer financially entangled. The law has provided the boundary between his life and my life. The law has allowed me to move forward without having to maintain any connection to my past. Chloe is now working as an environmental consultant. Chloe has her own apartment in Omaha. Chloe has built her own life that is separate from her parents, but Chloe and I remain close. Chloe and I have dinner together regularly. Chloe and I talk about what happened during the divorce, and I have been able to share with her what I learned from the process. Paula and I continue to work together at Riverside Components. Paula and I have become closer friends as a result of the support she provided me during the divorce. Paula and I have talked about forming a small consulting firm that would help other women protect their financial interests when they are in situations similar to the one I was in. The grandfather clock continues to tick in my living room. The grandfather clock continues to keep time for my life. The grandfather clock is no longer keeping rhythm for a marriage, but it is keeping rhythm for my own life, for my own choices, for my own future. The wedding ring remains in the drawer, in the box, in my house. I have not thrown it away. I have not destroyed it. I have simply stored it as a reminder of what I survived, what I learned, and what I became as a result of having to protect myself. I am no longer angry with Gregory. I am no longer hurt by his betrayal. What I am is clear. What I am is certain. What I am is a woman who has learned that the most powerful response to betrayal is not emotional, but legal. What I am is a woman who has learned that documentation and procedure can be more effective than yelling in tears. What I am is a woman who has learned that the law, when applied correctly, can be not a weapon, but a tool for establishing justice. He left in applause at a restaurant in front of 150 people. I stayed in the law, in the procedure, in the documentation, and I won by being able to sleep peacefully at night, knowing that I had done what was right, knowing that I had protected myself and my daughter, knowing that I had not destroyed my own dignity in the process of protecting my interests. That is what victory looks like, not the destruction of the other person, but the establishment of boundaries that are clear, that are legal, that are impossible to deny or violate again. That is what I learned in a courtroom in Omaha, Nebraska, on a day when it was raining, when a judge was making a decision about my future, when my daughter was watching her mother refuse to be destroyed by her father's betrayal. That is what the law gave me, and for that, I am grateful. Public humiliation in a marriage does not require a public response. Public betrayal does not need to be met with emotional outbursts. Sometimes, the most powerful response to infidelity and asset concealment is to respond with documentation, with procedure, with the clear application of law. When someone violates the rules, the appropriate response is not to become emotional, but to make sure the rules are enforced. When someone betrays you, the appropriate response is not to destroy them, but to document what they have done and present that documentation to the people whose job it is to administer justice.